Today we're going to talk about reverb. Reverb is so exciting because it allows us to really get some cool sounds and it vibes everything together. I think one of the things that we have to remember is when we record in isolated spaces, a lot of times there's no reverberation or there's minimal reverberation. I like to use a lot of room mics so that there's at least natural reverberation in places that I can get it or get away with it. You can also, by using your release time settings and compression, gain a little more of the room tone, so we can get a little bit more room juice out of things like snares and guitars and a lot of that kind of stuff we can get more naturally. But in the end, especially for vocals, we need some cool verb. So reverb has a couple of functions, but let's talk about it real quickly. Reverb essentially, for one, is defined specifically by having multiple, and most specifically thousands to millions of reflection points. So a reverb is not a single echo. A reverb is a multitude of reflections, and the multitude of reflections essentially make up reverberation. So in a natural acoustic space, if I just go into, let's just say I go into a theater, there's going to be natural reverberation in the room. Now, obviously, it's tamed and it's subdued to a certain degree because it's fitted for certain acoustical properties. But if I go into a gym, like a basketball court, I just immediately hear different reverb properties immediately. If I go into a cathedral, it's very noticeable that the reverb properties there are very different. And it comes down to what are the reverberating surfaces that are actually bringing back those returns. So when I'm in a smaller room and if there's not a lot of treatment on the wall, meaning like if there's a lot of open bare walls, we're going to get a lot of reflective points. And to the degree that a lot of those can be very damaging to the overall sonic characteristic because there's just too many. And they're really tight in space. So, and when we talk about the parameters, let's look at the natural acoustics and we'll kind of talk about that. With reverberation, although there's a multitude of reflections, because of specific objects in the room or specific locations that may be closer than others, like if right now I'm measuring reverb and I'm closer to this wall than I am to that wall, and the majority of the reverberation points come from that direction and they all come together kind of as a cluster in a very short amount of time, but yet I have reflective points off short elements. What I actually have is I have early reflection points. So my early reflection points actually can be a little more isolated, a little bit more like an echo, but and a little more like a slap, like very quickly in terms of that reaction point, like more of a singular small cluster of reaction points or reflections versus the majority of the other reflections. And that is very noticeable in very large spaces as well. So if I was in a cathedral and I'm standing next to a column, I'm going to have my long returns versus my overall everything else return. So let's talk about the specific properties as they go to reverb. One of the things is that in a small room, a lot of times we talk about the decay time, which is how long the overall reverberation groups take to subside. In a small room, it's very quick. Medium rooms, they're longer. In large rooms, they can be very long. And like if just imagine you're in a tunnel, it's going to take forever. At the Grand Canyon, it's going to take a long time. So when we look at our reverb in the box, like the plugins, they're really just mimicking those acoustical properties. A lot of these companies either measure out or try these combinations of measures, or they literally go and take a multiple set of mics and test and measure the milliseconds between the source and reflective points throughout a room, and then model that room inside of the plugin engine. And so that's kind of what we're looking at in terms of where we get those tones and those vibes and those things from the reverb. But let's talk about the real case use of reverb and how it's used. In the DAW, we usually call it a one main reverb so that everybody's kind of in the same space. From there, we may have additional reverberation to really get vibey for other tracks and things like that. And of course, we can use it for texture or overall like sound design. So in that case, well, most cases, we actually use it as a bus or a separate auxiliary component that we can EQ and make adjustments to. We may even want to gate. We may want to make adjustments in really cool fashion to be able to do that. The other thing is that we actually need to, and it's very surprising that this conversation happens because a lot of times you don't see it until it's there. If your music's jamming along and you got verb going, the reverb is part of the sound. As soon as there's a quick stop on the music, the reverb the decay and how much is in it is very noticeable. So like if the band's chugging along and all of a sudden they want to do this big hit, bah, everybody stops. The reverb tail is just going to keep going. It's going to sound, unfortunately, very amateurish. All of a sudden, your reverb's showing, right? So, because a lot of times what we do is we set up the reverb, we hear it, and then we bury it in the mix, or we put it in the mix so it feels subtle and natural. It'll show itself in these breakpoints. And so we want to have all of our reverb, instead of on individual channels, we want to have it as a master reverb or a few master reverbs on separate tracks as auxes, so that we can automate their volumes when we go into these transitions, so that we tail off those dead stops instead of having to hear this big boomy echo or whatever, right? And truly, one of those big things is we actually have to tailor automation to the verb, and we have to pay a lot of attention to the reverb. So I noticed a lot of things that a lot of engineers do is we get into the studio, we start tracking, a vocalist is singing, they're like, this is too dry, I can't feel it, I need a verb. So we slap a verb on there, and then for whatever reason, that reverb stays in the session till the mix, and even sometimes beyond, and no one ever really looks at it enough or pays much attention to it. And believe me, that's the thing, is that the big difference there between how the pros use reverb and how the rest of the world uses reverb is the pros use reverb as a tangible item in front of them, and even if it's in the plugin window, because they realize how important the verb is. If you literally just took the vocal and the verb and made them stand on their own, they need to be able to work together, and it needs to be a glorious thing, and we really can get it out of the two of them, you know what I mean? So we have to put a lot of attention into it with equalization and sometimes even compression, but definitely a lot of limiting, sometimes even gating, depending on what we're going to do. So I'm going to show them to you. One other note to mention in that process, though, one of the reasons that the reverb is so important when it comes to like a lot of the pros that have been around long enough, and it's a little bit missed in the newer generation, is because in the 80s and even in the early 90s, you would get a reverb unit and you'd spend, thousands of dollars on a singular reverb unit, and it would actually have its own little mixer on the desk. So it was an item that like you could pay attention to. It had its own isolated, it wasn't buried in the mix engine at all. Now it is very much buried in the mix engine because of presets and things like that. A lot of people slap a preset and move on with their life. That's really not what we should be doing, though. We really need to pay a lot of attention to what's going on. The reverb can actually muddy the mix because we have to look at what frequencies are going on in them and how we feed it. Like if we're feeding, let's just say we have a single reverb and we're only really feeding, we're like, oh, well, there's not a lot of reverb from the drums, there's not a lot of reverb from the bass, but we're feeding like this one synth and a lot of vocals. So then that means what frequencies are involved in the synth, how many vocals layers are you sending? If you're sending 20 different vocals down a reverb chain, all of a sudden we're talking about mid-frequency focus and a lot of mid-frequency muddy engines pulling in our mix. Go mute it and see how much it's really disturbing your overall mix characteristics. So it is very important. We set it up in part of the mix design. So let's take a look at it. So as we switch over and start to kind of focus on this, let's take a look at a couple things. In this same song that we were looking at last time. La da da, la da da. Love is for Christmas. La da da, la da da. Love is for Christmas. La da da, la da da. So the way we set this up, and the way you can kind of see that this is actually set up specifically here, there is a snare verb, and I have a kit verb, a vocal verb, and then from there we're talking delays, any ambient verbs that maybe were set up for specific things within the song. And so, like as a great example, like let's take a look. I'll open up the difference between. This is the H-verb plugin from Waves, which I love. This is a really easy, adaptive kind of scenario. In this instance, you can immediately see that the reverb time for the snare verb is very short. So we're looking at very short decay times, where when we go over here to the overall drums, we're putting in a lot more reverb length. Let's go listen to it without. La da da, la da da. Love is for Christmas. La da da, la da da. Love is for Christmas. La da da. And it really gets us that little bit of juice or energy that allows it to kind of glue or connect together by using these. But the way these are set up is really, it's done like this a lot of times. So here's the pre-delay. This pre-delay option is essentially this The pre-delay is that grouping that happens before the cluster. Okay, so now in order to set this up, we got to hear this for real. So right now I'm looking at, it's at a negative 21.8. I fed it into the mix, but let's bring it out. Sometimes when you're doing this in front of clients, boy, they don't like it because they're like, oh, it's already, that's the thing. Don't mix in front of clients unless they're going to chill there and be on social media, do something else. They really need to be a fly on the wall until you're ready to actually talk. All right, now here's the first mix. This is what it sounds like. What they're going to hear in the situation, what a lot of times people get a little confused about, is you got to hear the verb. You got to hear the verb to set the verb, design the verb, and then we put the verb back in the mix. So let's take a look. Sorry, put that back. There's a little bit of guitar being fed here too. What we're going to do is we're going to set up a couple things. Really, you can see this as this works out over in this engine. We can actually shape. That's what I kind of like about this. We can shape kind of how long it holds out before it starts to decay. We can set up the reverb time so it's a lot shorter. Love this for Christmas. But here's the big thing with the reverb engine. When the mix is open and everybody's in, and depends on when and where you're using it, you're really only hearing the top half of the verb. So you don't actually get to hear the verb go all the way to the bottom. So when we set this up, that's why you'll see this alternate shape. It's not just a smooth all the way down, because we're trying to focus a lot of the energy on which part is actually being heard, and then we can bury it. We can also color and shape it at this point in time. So this is a good time when you're like, and oh, again, because this is on a bus, it's going to go all wet. We may want to adjust the overall size, but once that's set, we can do a couple things with it. This kit verb can immediately take on a graph if we're like, you know what, we love it. A lot of times you just have to be mindful of the highs. A lot of times the issue is that there's too many high frequencies going on, because the high frequencies have a lot more energy. They're the things that splash around. You're not going to hear that with the lows. Love this for Christmas. Okay, yeah, we like that. Now we're going to put it in the mix. Love this for Christmas. All right, good, yeah. So we hear that in the mix. And then we're going to do the same thing with the vocals. With this V-verb, let's go look at it real quick. Another thing that I always do in Pro Tools, just kind of give you an idea, is in the verbs, you'll notice that they're grayed out in the solo. If you use Command, you're going to solo safe them. The reason I do that is I want to be able to solo my instruments with the verb in. So when I solo the drums, the verb's still on. So I'm hearing the big picture, so let's go to the vocal. Sorry, there's the bus. Love is for Christmas. La da da, la da da. So again, let's look at the vocal verb. Oops. Notice there's automation on it. Let me turn it off just so you can follow along. La da da, la da da. Love is for Christmas. La da da. So essentially, I set up the timing nice and easy. It's fair. La da da. La, da, da. But I also have with it, love this for Christmas. La da da, la da da. Love is for Christmas. I have two graphs. I essentially have this graph and this graph. If you bypass those, la da da, la da da. Love is for Christmas. La da da. Still a filter at the top, a little bit of brightness to kind of put something back over here. So it's like essentially as we're transitioning, we got a little bit of that boost. And then over here we have some mids pulled, some major mids pulled, just to kind of not allow too much mid-energy focus. La da da, la da da. Love is for Christmas. La da da, la da da. And then what you're going to see, if we go look at it. La da da, la da da. Love is for Christmas. La da da. La da da. Love is for Christmas. La da da. La da da. Then we had to automate the ending. So let's listen to the ending with the automation.
Love is for Christmas.
Now, if we did not automate that, let's back it up.
Love is for Christmas.
And actually, that one's not too bad. They're all in this way. Let me show you these guys. Everybody that the vocal touches and a lot of the music touches is set up with, you know, the idea that we need to make sure we take
Love is for Christmas.
And so, like, anybody
Is for Christmas.
Anybody that's got too much energy in there, even the snare kit verb, you can kind of hear it.
Love is for Christmas. Love is for Christmas.
So what we're gonna do is we're literally just gonna go on that last hit. That last hit just has to come down.
Love is for Christmas. Love is for.
And see how quick that came down? Too quick.
Love is for Love is for Love is for Christmas.
And so here's how we build
Love
it.
is for Christmas. Love is for Christmas.
A little more that way, and we can even get away with more this way.
Love is for Christmas.
All right, so it kind of have a nice natural tail. It has to be automated in order to get that. Those dead stops really get us when it comes to those changes. There's a lot of verbs out there, you know, there's a lot of reverb options out there that you can set up the timing, but the biggest thing is that we have to set, the biggest thing we're looking for is we have to set that decay. Our decay time has to be pretty spot on. I mean, that big thing is that decay and pre-delay engine between the two of them have to be set. If there's any filters built in, like some of these have filters, let's see. This one has an EQ filter that's built in that you can make adjustments with. I always prefer to just drop our standard EQ on the post to mess with it. That's what this damping option is here. But you can see there's a lot of really cool things that you can do with these in order to get there. A lot of the modern reverbs have those kinds of things. You can also see there's some really cool options here with the decay envelope where you can set up this crossover timing, input, output, echo options. You can actually add dynamics if you wanted to do compression. And that's the other thing with this in terms of the drums. One last thing with the reverb on the drums is if we wanted to create this like huge, I'm just gonna can this and use this snare as an example. If we wanted to make this just massive 80s style drum verb, what we can do is we just make a big verb and let's go push it.
Love is for Christmas.
So let's get back to automation.
Love is for Christmas.
Let's go back to, oops.
La da da, la da da.
With our snare. So check this out. What we can do with this, we can do it in an EQ. We could also do it with this section here with our filter. We're gonna make it real low. You know, and then we can just jump in and gate it. And then if we want any more, any whatever. And then we just put it in. I mean, even down with this low, we could probably.
for Christmas. La da da, la da da. Love is for Christmas. La da da, la da da.
Yeah, it's getting a little whoopy, so it's just a little bit of relaxing off this.
La da da. Love is for Christmas. La da da, la da da. Love is for Christmas. La da da.
But you can see in combination, in the use of that kind of combination of a gate with the verb with some EQ, we really get to be able to change a lot of the substance of what's going on with the snare, because that's what's being fed. Lastly, I will say this. This is not necessarily the best session to do it in, but let's say you have oohs and ahs. Oohs and ahs can easily be fed into the verb to make some really, really cool stuff happen with utilizing the pre-function. I don't think we have, I think this is a single vocal instance. Oh yeah, and even the guitars. I'm trying to think if there's anything with the guitars that's a little more elongated. But what can happen is in that feed, so the vocal feed looks like this. When we look at our, 5/6, we're looking at our vocals in the verb. Right now they look like this, and they're being fed post fader. If we wanted a little more of that, like, kind of haunting, ghostly reverb, we put it in the pre, and we turn the main volume for the source down and feed it that way. And then all of a sudden we have this like glorious angelic vocal storm, which is awesome in terms of the verb. Anyway, hopefully that helps. We're going to be dialing in more reverb options this week, so check it out. More to come. Talk to you soon.